When a retired canine named Ranger breaks free from his handler during a storm, he leads authorities to a horrifying discovery. His former partner, war veteran Daniel Hurst, chained to a tree with no signs of struggle. Deputy Mia Halbridge, a fellow combat veteran, is pulled into a chilling conspiracy involving a secret military program, experimental trauma conditioning, and the systematic erasure of former soldiers deemed unstable. As Ranger helps trace clues no one else can sense, Mia uncovers a trail of ghost units, buried evidence, and branded soldiers used as pawns in psychological warfare. At the heart of it all lies Colonel Faye, a man who believes control is more important than truth. But when the past fights back, it doesn't come in silence, and Ranger, the one who saw everything, may be the only witness left who remembers what justice really looks like, what really happened in the woods. Why was Daniel silenced? And how far will Mia and Ranger go to expose a war they never stopped fighting? Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. The pine trees whispered secrets that only the wind could carry. Somewhere between the crash of distant thunder and the first cold droplets of rain, something stirred. Something more than the wild. It was instinct. It was grief. It was a loyal heart answering a silent cry no one else could hear. And the one who heard it had 4 legs, amber eyes, and a soul that remembered too much. Ranger had never disobeyed a direct order, not in the field, not on patrol. But something about that night on the mountain made his heart lurch in a way his handler had never seen before. 1 minute, they were navigating the edge of Route 12 outside Helena, Montana, returning from a routine trail check. The next, a gust of wind brought a scent so sharp, so raw with pain, that the K9 stopped cold in his tracks. "Ranger, heel!" Officer Cam Braden called out, straining against the leash. But Ranger didn't look back. His nose twitched, his ears pricked. There was blood in the air, faint but undeniable, and underneath it, metal, the clatter of something swaying. The pull became too strong. By the time Cam lost his footing and fell in the mud, the leash had snapped free, and the dog was gone, vanishing into the dense pine underbrush as the storm rolled in. Up higher in the hills, the air was colder, wet. Pine needles clung to Ranger's fur as he pushed through the brush. Each step was deliberate, each sniff deeper than the last. He was trained for search and recovery, yes. But this wasn't a job. This was personal. Ranger slowed as the smell thickened, coppery, earthy, wrong. The trees opened into a small clearing, silent, still, and at its center stood a tall pine tree, scarred by time and lightning. Chained to it was a man's body, slumped forward, knees sunk in moss, head bowed like he'd been praying. Dog tags hung from his neck, catching the moonlight through the branches. The rain had just begun to fall. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He walked to the man slowly, his tail low, his breath shallow. He sniffed the boots first, military issue. Then the wrists, cold, bruised. The chain was thick and old. But the man's skin bore fresh wounds. The name on the tags read, SGT Daniel Hurst. Ranger lay down beside him, pressing his flank to the body like he used to do when Cam would collapse on the couch after a double shift. The wind rustled the trees. The storm was getting closer, but there was no struggle here, no claw marks in the earth, just deliberate cuts, deep, methodical, ritualistic, and strangest of all, peace. Whoever did this didn't want him to vanish. They wanted him found. Tupta. Dawn, when the rescue teams finally located Ranger, thanks to his GPS chip, they found the dog curled at Daniel's feet. The K9 growled when they approached, his body still as stone, eyes locked on every move. Deputy Mia Halbridge stepped out of the SUV, her boots sinking into the wet earth. She knew before anyone said a word. She knew from the shape of the shoulders, from the tilt of the jaw. "No," she whispered, voice cracking as she knelt. "Dan?" Ranger turned his head and growled low, protective, almost warning her not to disturb what remained. "It's okay, boy," Mia said softly, tears already running down her cheeks, like he understood that this was the end of something he had carried longer than anyone else. The Medal of Honor had been authorized in the early hours of the week prior, a rare posthumous reversal after full investigation. The language in the citation was clear: for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. But none of the words on the paper captured what Daniel had done. Not really. There was no mention of the chain that held him to that tree, no footnote for the man he never broke in front of, no annotation for the dog he refused to abandon, even. In silence, the Secretary of Defense approached the podium first, voice somber, carefully measured. He spoke of sacrifice, of hidden wars, of the unseen burdens carried by those who served in operations never recorded. He said Daniel was a reminder that valor sometimes happens in the shadows. But it was Mia who delivered the eulogy. She stepped forward without notes, hands unclenched, throat tight. "Daniel Hurst didn't die in combat," she said. "He died because someone decided his truth was inconvenient. He died because his loyalty was louder than his fear. And he died with his head high because he knew Ranger would carry the rest." She paused, glancing down at the dog. Ranger lifted his head. "We were trained to fight together, but no one trained us for what happens when our country forgets us. Daniel wasn't forgotten because he failed. He was forgotten because he didn't, because he remembered what honor really was, because he wouldn't play along." Her voice caught, but she didn't stop. This medal should have been draped over his uniform years ago. Instead, we're placing it here, on his stone, beside the flag he defended, next to the dog who never left his side. She stepped down slowly. Cal met her halfway. Together, they knelt and placed the medal box on the granite base. Ranger moved closer, gently lowering his head until his nose touched the top edge of the flag. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sacred. After the service, the crowd lingered. One by one, veterans approached, some saluting, some simply nodding. A woman in her 50s left a crumpled letter. A boy no older than 10 placed a single coin on the stone, like they used to do for soldiers they couldn't forget. Cal stayed, back while Mia remained near Ranger, her hand on his shoulder. A breeze stirred the canopy. In the distance, the rifles of an honor guard fired their final salute. The sound echoed off the stones, sharp and final. As the last guests left, Mia looked up at the new engraving on the wall beside Daniel's resting place. It had been added just the day before, by request, the wolf nose. Simple, quiet, true. They left after that. But not Ranger. He stayed, for hours. Long after the clouds had broken open and the soft rain began to fall, Ranger remained seated, in front of the stone, unmoving, ears tilted forward, as if waiting for one last command that would never come. And when he finally stood and turned to follow Mia, there was no rush in his steps, only purpose. He had remembered everything. Now he could let go. But he felt it, the weight of everything he tried to bury walking beside him through the door. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. was colder than Mia expected. Not in temperature, but in tone. Polished marble, fluorescent lighting, and the constant hush of a place where truth was filtered through protocol. The gallery was packed, but quiet. Cameras weren't allowed inside, yet the world was watching from every outside screen, every stream, every whisper of commentary stretching. Across the country, Faye sat at the defense table, no longer bleeding, no longer in charge. A suit hung from his shoulders like borrowed armor, his eyes shadowed with the wear of days spent under scrutiny. He didn't look at Mia or Cal or any of the veterans seated behind them. Ranger lay at her feet, still and silent, only his ears. Shifting as voices echoed through the chamber, the prosecution called witnesses. One by one, they took the stand, men and women, who had once vanished without explanation, now given the microphone. Eli went first, still limping, voice rough from damage not yet healed. His words were steady, unapologetic. He said we were assets, not people, that we were only dangerous if we remembered who we were. The jury didn't move, but the room did. You could feel it in the stillness, in the way shoulders squared just slightly, in the way eyes stayed locked forward. Another former echo subject followed. Then another. Their testimonies built like bricks, stacking a wall too high for even the most expensive defense team to climb. Then came the tape, the footage of Daniel Hurst, the branding, the silence that followed. When the screen went dark, no one spoke. The judge called for a recess, but the silence held even as chairs scraped and attorneys shuffled their papers. Outside, the steps of the courthouse swelled with supporters, photos of Daniel, posters with Ranger's face, handwritten signs that read, "We remember." The verdict came on the 5th day, guilty on all counts: conspiracy, illegal detention, human experimentation, obstruction of justice. The judge read each charge aloud, his voice even, his expression unreadable. Faye sat without reaction. No outburst, no denial, just the hollow acceptance of a man who had built his world on control and watched it collapse brick by brick. As the courtroom emptied, one older veteran stood in the aisle and approached the defense table. He carried something small in his palm, Daniel's blood-stained dog tag, preserved in resin, a keepsake from the first recovery site. He set it on the table. Faye didn't look up. "You earned that," the man said. No one stopped him. Later, Mia stepped into the sunlight with Ranger beside her, the courthouse behind them, and a long line of people ahead. They didn't cheer, they didn't clap, but they nodded, and they made space, and for once, the silence felt right. Cal joined them, holding a folder of documentation that would now go into the National Archives. Echo protocol would never be erased again. "You think he ever believed what he was doing?" Mia asked. Cal shook his head. "I think he stopped caring whether it was right. He just didn't want to feel powerless again." Mia looked down at Ranger. He was watching the crowd, tail low, body relaxed for the first time in days. "He didn't win," she said. "No," Cal agreed, "but it took every last thing we had to prove it." They turned toward the monument lawn, where a temporary memorial had been placed. Photos, flags, letters from families who now had answers. And in the center, surrounded by stone, a plaque bearing Daniel's name. Ranger walked toward it on his own, sat beside it, stared. Mia didn't call him back. He had earned the moment, so she let him have it. The sky over Arlington was a soft slate gray that morning, the kind that threatened rain, but held back just enough to let the world keep still. Rows of marble headstones stretched out in perfect formation, quiet in a way only military ground could be. The crowd wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. Those who came understood what it meant to show up when no one else had. Mia stood beneath the ceremonial canopy, dressed in formal blues, heels pressed firmly into the damp grass. Her eyes didn't leave the folded flag resting on the podium. Cal stood behind her, coat buttoned tight, hands clasped. Ranger sat on the platform. Beside the casket, Daniel's casket, his posture rigid but calm. Mia stepped into view. "It's already out." Faye's eyes snapped to her. He kept the gun raised. "Then what do you want?" She raised her badge. "Justice." He laughed once. "There's no such thing." Ranger didn't move. Mia didn't. A blink, and then a shot rang out, but it didn't come from Faye's rifle. He dropped it as blood bloomed across his shoulder again, the impact spinning him sideways. Cal lowered his rifle, expression flat. "You don't get to run anymore." Faye collapsed to his knees, gasping. Mia stepped forward, cuffs in hand. This time, she would deliver him herself, and she'd never take her eyes off him again. They didn't fly him out this time. Faye left Arizona shackled in the back of a secured Transport rig with Mia riding shotgun, and Ranger stretched across the rear cabin space like a silent sentinel. Cal drove. The heat was relentless, pressing against the windows, but no one complained. The trip to Washington would take days, and they weren't about to risk another disappearance. This time, there were no federal escorts, no bureaucratic handoffs. It was personal. Faye didn't speak for the first few hours, just stared at the floor, his shoulder heavily bandaged from the shot Cal had put through him. But by the second day, somewhere near the New Mexico border, he started. "You don't get it," he muttered, eyes fixed on the passing desert. "You never did. I was cleaning up a system that refused to fix itself. Mia didn't turn around. By drugging veterans, disappearing them, branding them like animals, I kept them from becoming threats," he said. Echo was never about cruelty. It was about containment. Ranger lifted his head and growled low in his throat. Faye shifted uncomfortably, finally meeting the dog's eyes. "He remembers," Faye said softly. "Doesn't he?" "He remembers everything," Mia replied. The third night, they stopped at a secure marshal's outpost in Colorado, locked Faye into a holding cell with reinforced surveillance and local deputies on rotation. Cal double-checked every perimeter sensor before locking the vehicle for the night. Mia sat on the porch of the small facility, staring up at the stars. She'd been running on adrenaline for so long, she'd forgotten what stillness felt like. Ranger lay at her feet, chin resting. On his paws, he didn't sleep much anymore. Not deeply. Neither did she. "He won't break," Cal said, stepping out beside her. "He doesn't have to," she replied. "The evidence already has." They were halfway through Utah the next day when the news broke. The Justice Department had formally charged 3 former military contractors with conspiracy, assault, unlawful detention, and obstruction. 2 ranking officials from a private intelligence firm were named in the indictment. Echo Protocol was now a federal case with teeth. Faye sat up straighter in his seat, lips pressed tight. "You didn't think we'd go public," Mia said, eyes on the road. "I thought you'd do what we were all trained to do. Bury it. I'm not that kind of soldier anymore." That night, they stayed at a law enforcement barracks outside Denver. The cell was reinforced concrete and sealed from the inside. Still, Mia slept next to the door, Ranger at her side. Just after 3 a.m., the hallway camera caught movement. Faye had tried to hang himself, using a torn strip from his cot's blanket. Cal was the first to reach him, cutting him down before the noose could finish the job. When Mia entered, Faye was slumped on the ground, coughing, his face pale. "Cowards don't get to check out early," she said. "You'll see it through, just like they had to." Faye's voice came out hoarse. "What I did, it was supposed to protect people." "You destroyed people," she snapped. "And now they'll speak in front of Congress. They'll tell the world." By the time they reached D.C., the media frenzy had shifted into full-on pressure campaign. Cameras waited at every checkpoint. Protesters lined the streets, waving signs with Daniel's name, Ranger's silhouette, and words like accountability and justice etched into cardboard. Mia kept the vehicle sealed and tinted. No interviews, no statements, just the mission. They delivered Faye to federal custody under full documentation. They walked him through the doors themselves. Ranger followed, not out of obligation, but because he had one final stare to give the man who thought no one would ever come back. Faye didn't say another word. He didn't look back, reading the statement herself. No generals, no brass, just her voice and the wind. Ranger sat beside the casket, facing it directly. His eyes didn't waver, even as the honor guard fired the 3-volley salute. He flinched once, but never looked away. When it ended and the guests began to file out, Mia stayed. She placed the drive, Daniel's drive, into a sealed capsule and set it at the foot of the grave, burying it just beneath the grass with her bare hands. A tribute not to forget the past, but to root it in the soil where truth couldn't be burned again. Ranger lay down, his head resting gently on the fresh earth. The cameras had moved on. The outrage was still growing, but here, At this quiet stretch of ground, something more permanent settled in. Mia knelt and whispered, "You did it, Daniel. You brought it home." The flag fluttered above them, and Ranger didn't move for a long time. The fallout didn't wait for permission. Within 72 hours of the footage release, subpoenas rained down on military contractors, Defense Department subdivisions, and shadow-budget think tanks. Congress convened a special oversight committee. The FBI, forced into the open by public pressure, launched a formal investigation into ECHO protocol's alleged violations. Names that hadn't appeared on any payrolls in years suddenly reappeared in custody logs and Senate hearing dockets. But Bryant Faye was no longer among them. He vanished in transit, cut loose during what was supposed to be a standard handoff between two agencies. The van arrived empty, no signs of struggle, no GPS error, just missing. The headlines screamed betrayal. Mia read them in silence from a bench outside the motel, her coffee going cold in her hands. Cal paced inside, still on the phone with a contact in D.C., trying to make sense of how someone like Faye, injured and restrained, could disappear under federal watch. The answer was obvious. He'd planned it. Some part of the system still worked. And for him, a favor called in. A blind eye turned. Mia set the cup down and looked at Ranger. He sat beside her, scanning the horizon like he expected to see him coming through the trees. His ears twitched, but he made no sound. "We're not done," she said softly. 2 days later, she got a call from a Border Patrol agent in Arizona. An unmarked vehicle had been spotted near an off-grid compound 20 miles outside Tucson. No license plates, but someone had recognized the face. Faye had been in the passenger seat. The compound was privately owned, a self-sustaining structure, built by former contractors and survivalists. It had its own water source, power grid, and communication scrambler. No official record of inhabitants, just walls, guns, and people who didn't like to be seen. Mia didn't ask for permission. She reactivated her federal marshal credentials. Granted. Back to her under emergency provision after the echo tapes went public, and boarded a flight within the hour. Cal followed. Ranger flew under special classification. No kennels, no sedation. This wasn't an arrest. It was a hunt. They arrived in Arizona under cover of dusk, the desert air dry and sharp against their skin. The compound lay low in a shallow canyon, barely visible from above. They parked 2 miles out and approached on foot, circling through the high rock ridge with only Ranger leading the path. They spotted the perimeter guards quickly, men with tired eyes and old gear, the kind of mercenaries who'd aged out of usefulness but still craved power. Mia counted at least 8. Cal carried only 1 rifle. She carried nothing. When they reached the outer fence, Mia gave the command. "Send the dog." Ranger didn't hesitate. He shot forward like a shadow, weaving through scrub and brush low to the ground. The first guard didn't even have time to yell before he was down. The second tried to raise his weapon, but Ranger hit him in the side, fast and clean. The rest panicked, shouting orders, scattering inward. Mia and Cal moved fast through the chaos, breaching the fence, slipping between cover as confusion spread. One by one, the guards fell back, not out of loyalty, but fear. Mia's name had traveled through channels even men like them couldn't avoid, and then she saw him. Faye stood in the open courtyard, disheveled, sweating in the heat, a rifle clutched in one shaking hand. He aimed it at Ranger, who stood 20 feet away, unmoving. "Where's the tape?" he barked. He opened his field laptop on a nearby rock and connected it. The system booted slowly, old hardware fighting the cold. When the folders loaded, the screen filled with names, medical logs, test results, footage, thumbnails. The sheer size of it was staggering. "Every field report," Cal muttered. "Not just Echo, but side projects, civilian trials, false suicides. Jesus." Mia scrolled through the entries, faces she recognized, veterans who'd been listed as missing, others declared unstable. Dozens of them. One file played automatically, security footage from a holding cell. A man screaming into the dark, begging for his family. Another showed a branding procedure being rehearsed on a mannequin, then tested on someone unconscious. "This is enough," Mia said, her voice cold. "We can bury him with this. Properly." Cal nodded, his mouth a hard line. "We leak it, not just to the press, military watchdogs, international observers, every outlet that ever doubted us." Mia reached into her pocket and pulled out Daniel's dog tags. She set them at the base of the tree, then stood in silence for a long time. The fog had begun to lift. The sky was still dark, but the blackness had softened at the edges. Morning wasn't far off. She turned to Ranger. "You brought us back." The dog sat beside the box, tail wrapped around his feet, head slightly tilted, watching. Mia placed her hand on his neck. "We're going to finish this." They left the clearing. As the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of ash, pine, and something cleaner, something that hadn't been in the air in a long time, accountability. Behind them, the trees stood tall again, not just a crime scene, but a grave. And finally, the truth was out of the ground. The footage aired first on a minor veteran-run channel, out of Colorado. A late-night broadcast stitched together by someone who knew exactly how to cut around clearance protocols. Within 6 hours, it had over 4 million views. By the next morning, major outlets were calling it the most explosive whistleblower leak in over a decade. Mia sat in the back corner of an old motel room off Interstate 90, the drive now duplicated and backed up in 5 separate cloud vaults. Cal manned the laptop, watching the media spin up like a storm catching heat. Ranger rested under the window, unmoving but not asleep, eyes half-lidded, body tense. It wasn't just the images that spread. It was the silence that had followed. Them for too long. The footage of Daniel refusing to speak under interrogation, the faces of soldiers sedated and chained, the branding. The files showing Echo Protocol's fingerprints on suicides that had never been investigated, the layers of falsified medical discharges, the redacted reports that, thanks to Daniel's copy, were now fully visible. Mia leaned forward and adjusted the motel TV's volume. A national anchor appeared on screen, voice measured but grave. A data leak pointing to a rogue psychological operations program allegedly run off-book by military contractors with links to private defense entities. Early reports suggest a targeted campaign to manipulate, control, and in some cases, erase the identities of post-service veterans. She muted it again. "I thought people wouldn't care," she said quietly. "They didn't," Cal replied. "Until they saw the tape." In the adjacent room, one of the rescued veterans wept quietly while watching the news. He hadn't spoken a full sentence since the escape. Now, for the first time, he didn't look away from the screen. Mia stood and walked outside. The parking lot was mostly empty. A grey sky hung overhead. A few trucks passed along the highway, kicking up grit as they went. She pulled out her phone and checked the notifications again. Emails from journalists, calls from lawyers, encrypted messages from old unit members. Then came the notification that froze her in place. Arlington National Cemetery. Memorial request. For SGT, Daniel Hurst. Approved. She walked back inside, held the phone out for Cal to see. He nodded once, no words. Later that week, the service was quiet but not small. Dozens gathered at the white stone plot where Daniel's new marker stood, the old AWOL branding struck from his record. The Medal of Honor citation had come. Through under special exemption, no podium, no cameras, just folded flags, hands over hearts, and silence thick enough to hold tears. Mia stood in uniform for the first time in years. Faye sat slumped in a metal chair, his jacket soaked with blood, his left arm in a makeshift sling. No military brass, no clipboard. Just a man stripped of layers, waiting for someone to remind him he was still visible. Mia stood across from him, silent, arms crossed. Ranger paced behind her, back and forth, eyes never leaving the figure in the chair. The only sound in the room was the soft scrape of claws against concrete. "You're quiet now," Faye said finally, his voice rough, tired. "No victory speech?" "There's no victory here," Mia replied. "Just truth and consequences." Faye tried to shift but winced as the pain surged through his shoulder. "What is this? Revenge tour? You going to make me dig my own hole next?" "We're not you," Mia said. "You get due process." Faye laughed under his breath. "And yet, here I am in a hole without a lawyer." Cal stepped into view, dropping a battered recorder onto the table. "Let's not pretend you're a civilian. You built Echo. You engineered disappearances. You buried men." "I contained threats," Faye said. "Men you served with, men who saw too much, did too much. They were unstable." Daniel Hurst wasn't unstable, Mia snapped. "He was loyal. He stood up when the rest of us were too scared." Faye tilted his head. "And look what it got him," Ranger growled. Mia leaned forward slowly, her voice steady. "He hid something, didn't he? Something you wanted." Faye's eyes flicked to her. "You think he told you everything?" "He didn't have to. He left a trail, and you followed it all the way into the open." Faye looked away. There was a drive, field logs, operational details from inside the early Echo tests. Daniel took it before he vanished. It contained timestamps, names, methods I needed it contained. "You tortured him," Cal said, voice low. "And you made his dog watch." Faye shrugged. "The animal wasn't supposed to live. It was an oversight." Ranger stopped pacing. He stood still, face turned toward Faye, ears raised. "He remembers," Mia said. "That's the thing about loyalty. It doesn't die in the dark like your programs." Faye chuckled dryly. "So where is it then? The drive? You have me. You've got your little rescue operation. But if you don't have that drive, it's all smoke. The agency will bury you." "I think Ranger knows," Mia said. Cal looked at her, confused. "What?" He said Daniel buried it somewhere. Somewhere only a loyal dog would return to. She turned to Ranger, kneeling. "You remember, don't you?" The dog moved instantly, sniffing the air, turning toward the stairs. He looked back, once then walked toward the door and waited. "Let's go," Mia said. "We're not done yet." They left Faye in silence, cuffed and still bleeding. As the door closed, Ranger disappeared into the night, his paws light against the forest floor, heading for a place only he knew. Mia followed, heart racing, because some things get hidden to stay lost, and some are buried to be found. Ranger led them through the trees like a creature caught between instinct and memory. He didn't hesitate, didn't pause to sniff or recalculate. His body moved with purpose, retracing steps Mia could only imagine. She followed behind, flashlight lowered, boots crunching against the pine needles soaked by a week of rain. Cal came next, rifle slung, watching their flank. None of them spoke. The forest thickened as they climbed, the slope gradually leading them to the same clearing where Daniel had been found. The tree was still there, tall and skeletal, its bark marked by the memory of violence. Ranger stopped. At its base, circled once, then began pawing at the earth, steady, focused. He didn't dig like a dog chasing scent. He dug like someone who had been here before, who remembered the weight of what had been hidden. Mia crouched and helped clear the soil, moving aside roots and wet clumps of mud. Her fingers hit something hard, a metallic edge. She cleared more of the dirt, revealing a small, rusted ammunition box, standard military issue. The hinges groaned as she forced it open. Inside, wrapped in an oily rag, was a flash drive, old but intact. There was also a photo folded neatly. The image showed 6 soldiers standing in front of a blown-out compound wall. Mia was there, Daniel too. The others were gone now, all ghosts in some way. On the back of the photo, scribbled in faint pen, were 3 words: "Trust the wolf." She handed the drive to Cal without speaking. Ranger lay beside them, calm now, alert, waiting. The trap had been sprung, and for the first time the hunters knew what it felt like to be watched. They came before sunrise, hoping to use the cover of morning fog. 3 blacked-out SUVs moving, slow and confident, through the pine road leading to the safe house. A fourth vehicle flanked them, a smaller nondescript truck with its headlights dark. From the hilltop perch, Mia watched through the rifle scope, heart steady, waiting. She didn't need to guess who sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. She could feel it in her bones. Faye was here. Cal sat beside her, eyes on the trigger for the remote charges they'd planted along the ravine line. "This is it," Mia didn't answer. Ranger stood between them, his body tense, tail rigid, his breathing shallow. The dog wasn't just alert, he was anticipating. He knew. The first two SUVs halted just short of the clearing. The back doors opened in tandem, and men in tactical gear poured out, fanning into the trees with practiced efficiency. Mia recognized the movement. Trained, experienced. Not mercenaries. Former military. Just like them. But this wasn't honor-driven work. This was cleanup. Then the smaller truck eased forward through the gap. Ranger growled. From the driver's side, a man in civilian clothes stepped out and walked around to the passenger door. He opened it, and there he was, Colonel Faye in the flesh. Same clipped posture, same careful step. He adjusted his coat like he wasn't standing in the middle of a war crime scene. He said something to the handler beside him and pointed toward the safe house. Cal keyed the radio. "It's him. Eyes on target." In the cabin below, the rescued vets stood ready. They weren't armed with rifles. They didn't need to be. What they had was fire in their eyes, clarity in their spines, and the knowledge that they were no longer victims. They had already survived the worst part. Mia watched as Faye scanned the area and made a slow advance toward the clearing. She gritted her teeth and turned to Cal. "Hold your trigger. Not until he makes a move." But Ranger moved first. He darted from cover with a sudden burst of speed, disappearing down the slope before either of them could react. Mia shouted after him, but he didn't break stride. He sprinted across the clearing, through the startled soldiers, and straight toward the man standing in the open. Faye turned too late. He pulled a pistol from his coat, leveling it toward Ranger. Mia didn't think. She fired once. Faye staggered backward with a sharp cry, the gun dropping from his hand as Ranger skidded to a halt just feet away. The soldiers froze, weapons raised, but no one fired. The sight of the dog and their bleeding commander broke the script. Cal stood, rifle shouldered. "Everyone drop your weapons, or we start leveling this hill." Some complied. Others hesitated. From the safe house, the front door opened, and Eli stepped out, half limping, crowbar still in hand. More figures followed. One by one, the men Faye had erased walked into the morning light. "You wanted ghosts," Mia called out. "Here they are." Faye sat against the dirt now, one hand clutching, his bleeding shoulder, the other reaching for his comm. Call for medevac," he gasped. "No," Mia said, lowering her rifle. "You don't get to disappear." Ranger stood inches from Faye's boot, his eyes fixed, breathing low. He didn't bark, didn't move, he just watched. Long enough to make Faye turn away. The cleanup crew began to lower their weapons. Some dropped them entirely. Whatever loyalty had kept them quiet before was gone now. They could see the truth. And it looked like 5 pale men and one determined dog, Mia. Approached slowly, the cold pine air sharp in her lungs. She stood over Faye and crouched beside him. "You branded them," she said. "You used them," he grimaced. "They were broken. They needed control." "No," she said. "You did." Cal joined her, snapping cuffs onto Faye's uninjured wrist. "We've got your records," he said. "Your files, your tapes, you're done." Faye didn't answer. He just looked at Ranger, like maybe for the first time. He understood what the dog remembered. They held Faye in the basement of an old ranger outpost, 2 counties away. Neutral ground with no digital footprint and no official ownership. Cal secured the cuffs himself, double-looped and anchored to a steel support beam. The screen went black. Cal sat back, shaken. "They made him watch." "No wonder he led us there," Mia said quietly. He remembered. They didn't speak for a moment. Then Mia disconnected the hard drives and slipped the tape into her jacket. We have enough. We take this to someone who'll listen, and if no one does, then we make them. Footsteps echoed faintly in the hall outside. Cal killed the lights. They moved fast, back through the crawl space, into the drainage tunnel before the door even opened. Voices called out, guards discovering the breach. But by the time the first alarm sounded, they were already gone, running into the trees as Ranger guided them through the dark. Behind them, in a cold, forgotten room, the screen still glowed softly and paused on Daniel's face. Not broken, not lost, just waiting to be remembered. By dawn, the safe house felt smaller. The rescued veterans were slowly regaining fragments of clarity, aided by the IV fluids and a constant rotation of watchful eyes. Eli sat upright now, legs stretched toward the fire, the burns on his neck healing beneath gauze. He hadn't spoken, much since Mia and Cal returned, but the flicker in his gaze said enough. He knew they'd gone back for more than answers. On the table beside him sat a small portable player hooked to a generator. The interrogation tape played on loop, the volume low, as Ranger watched the screen with an eerie stillness. He hadn't left that spot since they'd inserted the tape. His eyes followed every frame of Daniel. No growling, no sound, just watching. Mia stood by the window, arms folded, her jaw tight. "We don't wait for the next move," she said. "We force it." Cal leaned against the counter, holding the echo file list. "You sure you're ready for this?" "I'm not interested in ready," she said. "I'm interested in results." She walked over to the table and tapped the list. "We still don't have proof of Faye's location, but we know his reach. We use it." They took the tapes, the files, the images, and bundled them into compressed radio bursts. Then they broadcast them over veteran frequencies, encrypted, short range, piggybacked on amateur radio towers. They used old unit call signs, coded pings, the same cryptic language soldiers had once used to pass intel under fire. It wasn't about calling for help, it was bait. Within the hour, they got an answer. The first drone appeared above the tree line. At noon, silent, circling. Then came the perimeter breach, 4 vehicles rolling up the mountain path without headlights, unmarked but aggressive. Mia watched through the scope from a ridge nearby as men in dark gear moved in formation through the pines. "They didn't send a cleanup team," she muttered. "They sent an eraser." Cal adjusted the detonator in his hand. "That's what they do when ghosts start whispering." Down by the safe house, Ranger stood poised at the door, sensing the shift. Inside, the veterans stirred, some weakly reaching for tools or anything they could hold. Mia keyed her radio. "Now!" Cal triggered the first explosive, buried beneath the old utility truck at the edge of the driveway. It ignited with a heavy pop, blowing flame and shrapnel into the advancing team's flank. Screams followed. Chaos. From the ridge, Mia watched figures scatter. She and Cal moved quickly, circling around to flank the team. The rest of the traps had been set hours ago, tripwire flashbangs, decoy trails, and timed diversions. It wasn't about eliminating them, it was about destabilizing them. Mia fired 2 warning shots from the tree line, drawing return fire that thudded harmlessly into a false shelter shell. Inside the cabin, Eli pulled himself upright with a broken shovel in one hand. Another veteran passed him a crowbar. No words were exchanged. They all understood what this was. By nightfall, the attackers were in retreat, half their gear damaged, half their team limping or unconscious. Cal watched them go through the scope. "We gave them something they didn't expect," he said. "Resistance." "They'll report failure," Mia replied, "which means Faye will have to get involved directly." They returned to the cabin, where the mood had shifted. Not celebratory, not safe, but something closer to focused. The men who'd been strapped to chairs a week ago now stood in a loose circle, watching the forest, gripping tools like weapons. Mia stepped inside and placed Daniel's dog tags on the table. "We're not hiding anymore. Or he's trying to make them into something else." Eli's head dipped. "They told us we were ghosts now. Not alive, not dead, just used." Ranger stood up, ears twitching, and moved to the window. Mia followed his gaze. The forest was quiet. No tracks, no movement, but she trusted his instincts more than any camera. "We'll have to move them soon," Cal said. "Once they're stronger. This place isn't secure. If Faye's got even one asset monitoring emergency frequencies, they'll find us." Mia looked at Eli. "Do you remember anything else? Names, files, passwords?" He hesitated, then whispered, "There was a room. Off limits, even the guards didn't go near it." Daniel said he thought the records were stored there, real ones, before they started rewriting us. "Where?" "Back hallway, behind the mid-stations, marked with a red square." Mia turned to Cal. "We go back, not tonight, but soon." Cal raised an eyebrow. "You planning to knock twice this time?" "I'm planning to leave the door open long enough to bring the world in." Eli reached for her hand before she stood. His fingers were cold but steady. "He never gave in, you know. Daniel. They beat him, starved him, but he never broke." Mia's voice cracked as she answered, "I never expected anything less." Ranger returned to Eli's side, lying down once more. In the firelight the silence settled again, but it was different now. Less empty. A small spark of something else. The truth wasn't lost. It had just been buried. And now it was starting to rise. The break-in happened just after midnight. Rain swept across the trees in diagonal sheets as Cal and Mia approached the compound for the second time. This time on foot, wrapped in dark plastic ponchos and soaked to the bone. The plan was simple. Get into the records wing, extract what they could, and vanish before morning patrols reset. There was no backup, no law, just the storm, the night, and the quiet resolve of people who no longer cared about permission. The same drainage tunnel gave them access. The grating was still loose from the escape. They moved fast through the shaft, slick and cold, until they reached the interior crawlspace beneath the med bay. Cal took point this time, disabling a motion sensor with a pulse jammer before slowly prying open the service panel above. He hoisted himself into the darkness, then pulled Mia up behind him. The corridor outside the infirmary was dimly lit and empty. A single red exit light glowed at the far end. Ranger climbed out last, quiet and focused, nose low to the floor. He led them down the corridor, past the gurneys, past the room where Eli had screamed, and stopped at the door with the red square painted above the handle. Cal produced a keycard he'd lifted from one of the guards during their escape. He slid it through the panel. A green light blinked once, then the lock clicked. The room beyond was colder than the hallway, a long rectangular space with walls lined in cabinets and locked drawers. A metal table sat in the center, a stack of hard drives and old tapes piled on it. Monitors lined the back wall, currently black. An overhead light flickered once before steadying. Mia moved to the table. "Start bagging everything. Drives, tapes, notes. We'll sort them later." Cal opened a drawer and froze. "You'll want to see this." He handed her a plastic sleeve containing an old surveillance reel labeled Echo 17. Interrogation, Subject Hurst. Mia stared at it, her chest tightening. He kept the footage. They found a monitor with a built-in deck and inserted the tape. It whirred softly as the screen flickered to life. Daniel sat restrained in a steel chair, bloodied but upright, face swollen and mouth set in a grim line. Colonel Faye stood opposite him, clean, composed, holding a folder. The sound was tinny, but clear enough. "You're protecting something that doesn't belong to you," Faye said. Daniel didn't answer. "Where is the documentation?" Faye asked. "Where did you bury it?" Still no answer. Faye leaned closer. "You think loyalty will save you? These people will forget you exist." Daniel finally spoke, his voice slurred but fierce. "The dog won't." Faye paused. "Let the dog watch," he said to someone off-screen. "It'll remember." Mia flinched as the camera panned briefly to the corner, where Ranger, younger and alert, was leashed to a bolt in the floor, eyes locked on Daniel, unmoving. His tail didn't wag. His ears didn't twitch, eyes cloudy. Plastic tubing snaked from their arms to hanging fluid bags. One of the men, younger than the others, stirred weakly. His lips moved. Mia knelt beside him, gently lifting his chin. Recognition flickered in his dazed eyes. "Daniel," he whispered, the name barely audible. Mia's heart twisted. "We're here to get you out." She began unfastening the restraints. Cal moved to the others, checking pulses, muttering under his breath. Ranger remained in the doorway, his stance tight, protective. "They've been sedated for days," Cal said, "some deeper than others. I'll give them a stimulant mix, but it won't fully wake them. We'll need to carry 2, maybe 3. The younger man tried to sit up, failing, but his hand gripped Mia's forearm tightly. His voice came again, clearer now. He said the dog would come. Mia glanced at Ranger. The dog's ears twitched. She helped the man to his feet as Callie lifted one of the unconscious vets over his shoulder. They made their way back toward the drainage tunnel, slow and methodical. Each step thudded louder than the last in Mia's ears. Time stretched. At the tunnel entrance, Mia heard it, the faint chirp of motion sensors being triggered behind them. "Move!" she hissed. They dropped into the shaft one by one. As Cal pulled the last man through, the alarm blared above, a high-pitched wail that tore through the stillness like a blade. Mia didn't stop. She half-dragged, half-carried the younger vet through the cold runoff. Ranger pressed at her side. Cal kept pace behind them, the other man groaning in his arms. Lights snapped on along the outside of the tunnel exit. Search teams were mobilizing. They emerged from the forest at the break in the fencing they'd cut hours before. Beyond it, the truck waited, engine already running. Bullets cracked through the branches behind them as Mia shoved the injured man into the cab. Cal scrambled in next, dragging his burden across the seat. Ranger leapt in last, covering them with his body. Mia slammed the door and hit the gas. In the rearview mirror, men with rifles swarmed the fence line, but none dared cross. They weren't chasing prey. They were protecting secrets, and now some of those secrets were awake. The safe house was a crumbling log cabin tucked behind a retired fire tower, long since forgotten by local maps and trail signs. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and iodine. A fire crackled low in the hearth, casting flickers of orange light against the walls as Mia knelt by the couch, holding a cup of warm broth to the lips of the youngest rescue. He'd stirred twice since they'd fled the compound, but now, under a blanket, and with Ranger lying protectively at his side, he was beginning to focus. His name was Eli Tenner, private, 24 years old. Discharged for misconduct that Mia was beginning to understand had never actually occurred. His records had been altered, scrubbed down to a sentence about aggression and erratic behavior. Another flag, another discard. He sipped slowly, and his voice rasped. "You were there with Daniel, weren't you?" Mia nodded, her throat tight. "We served together." Eli's eyes drifted to the fire. "He fought harder than the rest of us. Always did." They hated that. Cal sat nearby, scribbling notes into a battered journal, occasionally glancing up to assess Eli's state. The others, 3 men and 1 woman, were resting in the adjacent room, 2 still unconscious. Cal had started them on IV fluids and anti-sedation therapy. The woman had come out of it briefly, murmuring something about cold water and names. "Carved into walls. What did they do to you?" Mia asked gently. Eli shook his head. "It wasn't just drugs. They were testing pressure, isolation, pain thresholds. They'd lock us in darkness for days, then flood us with noise, flash us combat footage, make us relive missions. They told us we were broken and they were going to fix us." He looked at Mia with eyes too old for his face. "They called it echo realignment, said we weren't soldiers anymore. We were data." Daniel resisted. He kept asking for proof, names, accountability. He demanded to see Faye. "You saw Faye?" Mia leaned closer. Eli nodded. "Once, through the glass. He watched us. He didn't look away when they started the branding, just stood there and wrote something on a clipboard." Mia clenched her jaw. "He's trying to erase everyone tied to Echo." Cal looked up from his notes. The glowing rectangle of the open shed cast just enough light through the trees to give them shapes. One of the guards stood watch while the other moved toward a metal table at the far end. Mia saw a handheld object pulled from a glowing orange tray. The shape was unmistakable. An iron. Ranger's body stiffened beside her. He stared at the building as though he could see right through the metal walls. The air around them changed. Even the crickets fell quiet. Inside the shed, the bound man bucked suddenly, his knees nearly giving out. The guard behind him grabbed him by the hair, forcing his head upright. Then came the scream, raw, guttural, broken in the way that only someone trained in silence could make sound that desperate. Mia flinched, every muscle in her body reacting as if it were her own skin that burned. "He's using unit code," she whispered. "The scream! That was patent. It was a call-out. Bravo, Sector Fallback 2-4. That's Echo Field language. That guy's military." "He's one of us," Cal said. "Another wolf." Ranger let out a deep, mournful howl. Low at first, then higher, longer, vibrating through the trees like a warning bell to something ancient. Mia turned sharply to quiet him, but Cal stopped her. "Let him," he said. "Let them know someone is still watching." The light inside the shed cut out. A few seconds later, the door slammed shut. The two guards emerged, one adjusting his jacket. The branded man was left inside. Mia reached for her radio. "We get that man out. First thing tomorrow. I don't care if we have to crawl through septic lines or burn this whole place down. Nobody screams like that and gets left behind." Cal tapped a finger against his wrist. "We can't go in without a plan. There's no cover, no blind spots, and the cameras are running infrared. If we move without jamming them, they'll see every step." Mia scanned the perimeter again, her mind already pulling together the outline of a breach. "We need an entry under their radar. That drainage line we saw to the south. Does it lead under the main facility?" "Based on topography, yeah. Probably used for runoff or septic flow," Cal said. "Then that's our way in. You prep the gear. I'll scout the tunnel before dawn. We go in tomorrow night." Cal nodded. "This time we don't just observe, we pull them out." Ranger was already moving ahead, his nose to the ground, eyes flicking toward the fence line. Mia reached out, touched the thick fur at the base of his neck. "I heard you too," she whispered. "And now they will." The rain returned just after sunset, tapping softly against the undergrowth, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Mia crouched beside the drainage tunnel's entrance, the rusted grate already dislodged and set, quietly aside. Ranger stood beside her, fur damp, eyes fixed forward. Cal adjusted the straps on his pack and dropped into the tunnel first, boots splashing into the thin stream running through the narrow shaft. Mia followed, crawling low behind him. Ranger came last, silent as smoke. The tunnel reeked of decay and chemicals, a slick film lining the walls. They moved slowly, methodically, stopping at each cross-joint to listen. Overhead, the vibrations of generators and foot traffic hummed through concrete. After nearly 30 minutes, Cal paused and signaled upward toward a steel grating with a narrow beam of his flashlight. Above them, dim light filtered through slats in the flooring. They were beneath the holding rooms. Mia pressed her ear to the metal. Muffled voices moved overhead, a metallic clank, footsteps, then a dragging sound, something heavy being shifted. "It's time," she whispered. They waited another 5 minutes before Cal slid the grating aside and hoisted himself up, vanishing into the darkness above. Mia followed. Ranger leapt up soundlessly beside them. The room they entered was cold and quiet. Empty gurneys lined one wall, restraints dangling from their sides. IV stands stood like skeletal sentinels in the corners. The air stung of antiseptic and blood. Ranger led them down a short hallway with surgical precision, nose to the floor, then the walls, then to a door with a biometric lock. The system was dark, possibly on backup power. Cal knelt, pulled a device from his bag, and connected a thin wire to the panel. 30 seconds, he muttered. The lock clicked. The door opened. Inside, 5 men sat strapped to chairs, all semi-conscious. Their heads lolled forward. No tractors, just silence and control. "This place was built to keep people in," Cal said, lowering the binoculars. not animals. Mia turned toward the wood line behind the hill. I'll approach from the front. Tourist hiker, maybe. Got turned around? You stay hidden, see what they do when a stranger walks up. Sounds like a terrible plan, Cal muttered, sliding his pack over one shoulder. But all right. Mia moved deliberately down the overgrown path, her hand brushing pine needles as she walked. The closer she got, the less the place looked like a ranch and more like a repurposed facility. Metal reinforcements behind the windows. A faint humming. Noise. Electrical. Consistent. She stepped into full view and paused at the gate. There was no bell, no mailbox. Just a black security panel near the entrance, wired to a solar battery on a steel pole. A voice cracked from a speaker. "This is private land. Turn back." "I think I'm lost," Mia said calmly. "Trailhead markers are gone. Thought this was public." There was a pause. Then the voice repeated with more edge. "You've been warned. Turn back." Mia held her position, allowing silence to build. A door opened on the far side of the porch. A man stepped out, tall and thin, in a flannel shirt and work boots. He didn't walk like a rancher, too precise, too rigid. He carried nothing in his hands, but Mia saw the bulge of a sidearm under his coat. She raised one hand, palm out. "I'm backing off," she said. "Just need directions." He didn't answer, just stared. The porch door creaked behind him as it opened again. Another figure emerged, older, bulkier, with a graying beard and a limp. His face wasn't immediately familiar, but Mia's stomach turned when he reached into his coat and pulled out a tablet, displaying a grid of camera feeds. One of them showed her jeep, another showed Cal's position near the tree line. "Colonel Bryant Faye," Mia said under her breath. She turned and walked away slowly, feeling his eyes bore into her back. By the time she made it back to the woods, Cal was already moving. "They made us," he said flatly. "They've got full-spectrum surveillance, more than I expected. Thermal, too. We won't get near them without a plan." "They saw you?" Mia asked. "I saw someone else." Cal pulled out his camera and flipped through several blurry photos. One showed a man, mid-30s, slumped in a wheelchair inside a side shed, pale skin, gaunt, eyes wide, a tube taped to his arm. "That's not staff, that's a detainee." Mia stared at the image. "Why keep him alive?" "Control," Cal said. "Fear, test data. Faye's probably running his own version of Echo off the books. When the army pulled the plug, he just moved it here. Easier to hide this way." Ranger let out a low growl, his gaze fixed back on the farm's silhouette through the trees. "We can't let them keep doing this," Mia said. "We need evidence, something indisputable. Then we burn it all down." Cal nodded. "Then we need to find out who else is inside." Mia crouched beside Ranger, running her hand down his back. The dog's pulse was calm but alert. "We go in quiet, cameras or not," she said. "And if they catch us?" Mia looked back at the photo of the man in the chair. Then they add 2 more names to the wall. The late evening fog rolled in, heavier than before, swallowing the foothills around the perimeter of the so-called farm. Hidden in the tree line a quarter-mile out, Cal crouched beside Mia, binoculars pressed against his eyes, barely breathing. The static in his earpiece faded just long enough for Ranger's low whine to rise, a subtle sound that made Mia's stomach clench. "I've got movement in the western outbuilding," Cal muttered. They watched through the high-powered lens as 2 figures exited the main house and walked with deliberate pacing across the gravel yard. One of them pushed a third man, hooded, barefoot, wrists bound in front. His shoulders shook violently. The floodlights above the door buzzed to life, illuminating the inside of the structure as the 3 disappeared into the steel doorway. "Are they prepping for an execution?" Mia asked, voice tight. "No," Cal said, lowering the binoculars. "They're going to mark him." Mia blinked. "What?" Cal exhaled, jaw tight. "It's not just psychological. Faye doesn't want them just broken. He wants them labeled, branded, from their position. Just a slow retreat into the woods, a warning, not an attack. Not yet." "They're testing your reaction," Cal whispered, his finger still resting against the trigger guard. just like they did to the others. Surveillance first, then pressure, then removal. Mia exhaled through her nose, heart steadying as she holstered her weapon. Why wait? Because they think we'll crack on our own, he replied, setting the rifle down beside the boarded-up window. And most of us did. Mia stepped back to the evidence wall, her eyes drifting to the circled names. You said this all came from Echo Protocol? Yeah, Cal answered. I was stationed at Fort Dagger Creek back in 2017 when the rumors started. Special unit assessments, lots of behavioral profiling. When the program shifted, we stopped seeing medical support and started seeing isolation. If someone pushed back or asked too many questions, they were flagged. After discharge, someone always kept tabs. It was never about helping us transition. It was about watching us disintegrate. He walked over to the plastic tub in the corner and pulled out a weathered binder. Inside were copied records, printouts, names, a list of former Echo operatives, all stamped as returned to civilian status. One name per page, each with a photo, rank, final deployment, and a short redacted paragraph that usually ended. In no further action required. Mia's eyes moved down the page until she found Daniel's profile. Rank, Sergeant. Final assignment, Echo 17, Ghazni Province. Redacted lines followed, then a final note. Subject demonstrated unstable. Tendencies during behavioral trials. Surveillance recommended. Flagged for resistance behavior. The last sentence made her stomach flip. Final status. Exemplar. What does that mean? She asked, tapping the word. It means they used him to make an example, Cal said. Kill one wolf to keep the rest in line. Ranger let out a low chuff, pacing near the window now. His ears twitched at every sound. Mia closed the folder and turned back to Cal. There was someone else in the file who stood out. Colonel Faye, Daniel's CO. I've seen him before. He was the kind of officer who never looked you in the eye. Never dirtied his boots unless it was for a photo. I didn't trust him then. And now he's the last name left in all this? Faye disappeared 2 years ago, Cal said. Wiped clean, no forwarding address, no federal oversight, no pension activity. Only reason I know where to start looking is because I traced a fuel delivery from a shadow account out of Leavenworth to a property in Montana, remote acreage under a fake ranching LLC. Surveillance photos showed fencing, heavy-duty, industrial-grade, cameras, barbed wire. It's not a farm, it's something else. Mia didn't need to hear the rest. We find it. I've already got coordinates, Cal said, handing her a worn notebook with scribbled maps. But we don't go in blind. You saw what they did to Daniel. This isn't arrest and detain. This is warn and erase. We're not kicking in doors, Mia said. Not yet. We watch, we wait. And when we move, we bring light. No more disappearing. Cal studied her for a long moment. You're not the same girl I knew in Kandahar. Neither are you, she said. Behind them, Ranger sniffed at a photo on the wall. Another Echo soldier, face half burned in the print. His nose crinkled and he barked once, low and pointed. Ranger knows, Cal murmured. He always did. Mia looked at the dog, then at the names pinned around them. They wanted him to watch Daniel die. They thought he'd forget. But that's not how wolves work. She looked back at the map. Let's go find Faye. The gravel crunched under Mia's boots as she stepped out of the jeep. The early morning fog still draped across the hillside like gauze. The valley before her was green and still, untouched by sound. Cal parked beside her, scanning the land with a veteran's eyes. Ranger stood between them, posture rigid, head tilted forward. They were looking at what was supposed to be a cattle farm, but it didn't smell like livestock. Ahead stood a long, narrow farmhouse with a weather-worn roof and a porch cloaked in shadows. To its left, several outbuildings lined the inner perimeter, each spaced out with mathematical precision. A high chain-link fence wrapped around the property in 3 tiers, topped with fresh barbed wire. Cameras were mounted along the posts. No cattle, no signs of grazing. And the wolf, he never forgets. The abandoned ranger station sat like a fossil beneath the firs, wrapped in shadow and silence, its wooden slats greyed from years of neglect. Moss overtook the stairs. The radio tower leaned slightly to the east, rust seeping down its spine. Ranger stood in front of it, unmoving, ears alert. His fur was soaked from the night trek, but his eyes never wavered. Something inside called him, not by sound or scent, but memory. Mia parked 100 yards down the trail, having tracked his GPS collar through the forest. She hadn't expected the signal to end here. The old ranger post hadn't been touched since a wildfire gutted most of the hillside 5 years back. She moved quietly through the trees, her service weapon holstered, one hand gripping a flashlight. When she emerged from the brush and saw Ranger sitting outside the warped front door, she froze. "You led me here," she murmured. The dog glanced at her once, then returned his stare to the building. Mia approached slowly. The door creaked open with minimal effort, revealing a room blanketed in dust and rot. But it wasn't empty. The far wall was covered in taped documents, yellowed newspaper clippings, Polaroids, and printed photos, all pinned to corkboard like a map of madness. Mia's breath caught as she stepped closer. Each face on the wall had a name beneath it. Some names she recognized, some were just dates. All of them were marked missing. Red marker circled 3 in particular, and there, in the center, was Daniel's face. His photo had a thick red X slashed across it. A small table beneath the board held a portable laptop. Dead now. A plastic crate beside it contained sealed manila. Folders with military labels, some faded, some smudged with dirt. Mia pulled one out and opened it. The file was labeled Echo Protocol, Asset List, dozens of names. Daniel's was on the 3rd page. Her skin went cold. A creak from the back hall snapped her head around. Mia reached for her weapon. "Easy," a voice called from the shadows. Male, dry, tired, and cautious. "You're not here to kill me. I can hear it in your steps." She turned, gun half raised. A man stepped out, arms visible, palms open, unshaven. Lean and rough, he moved like someone used to evasion. His clothes were worn tactical gear, mismatched and stitched in places. "Cal Mercer?" Mia asked. He gave a half smile. "Didn't think you'd find me that fast." "I didn't." He did. She gestured to Ranger. Cal's eyes flicked to the dog. "Still loyal, they always are. That's why they remember." She lowered her weapon. "You've been tracking disappearances." "Since 2019, he said, moving to the wall. "That's when I realized it wasn't just PTSD making us vanish. It was erasure. The kind the government doesn't put on paper. They called it echo. It started as psychological tracking, but it turned into something else. They wanted to see how long they could manipulate instability before it boiled over. Use trauma as a tool." Mia stared at him. "You're saying this?" "Was a program?" Cal nodded. "Unofficial, quiet. Targets were always veterans, isolated, denied benefits. Medicated heavily, then watched. When one started resisting, they vanished, like Daniel." "Why him?" she asked. Cal opened another folder. Inside was a photo of Colonel Faye, clean-shaven, uniformed, smiling for a press release. Faye was Daniel's CO during the last deployment. He oversaw all Echo units. Last trace I had of him, he was removed from the DoD registry after retirement. Off the grid, but not gone. Mia stared at the photo. "I knew Faye. He was like a ghost even back then." Ranger stood suddenly, tense, his nose twitching toward the boarded rear window. Cal moved to the wall and pulled down a dusty rifle. "And from a shelf. We've got company." Mia's heart pounded. "How do they know we're here?" "They always know," Cal said. "They're not hunting bodies, Mia. They're hunting ghosts, the kind that remember." Ranger growled low. "Teeth bare, outside, a twig snapped in the trees, and everything that had been buried was starting to surface." The night wind whistled through the broken rafters of the ranger station, carrying the sharp scent of pine and something metallic. Ranger's growl faded into stillness, but his body remained tense. Mia and Cal stayed, low, backs to the interior wall, their eyes fixed on the dark silhouette moving past the tree line outside. It didn't linger. No gunshots, no call-outs. Another silence, longer. "He's dead," she said. "I found him chained to a tree outside Helena, and there's something else. That mark, our mark. It was carved into the bark behind him." When Cal spoke again, the edge in his voice was unmistakable. "Where are you?" Mia gave the location. He didn't say goodbye. The line went dead. That night, as thunder rolled across the Montana hills, Ranger paced inside the small precinct kennel. Something in his body language was different, measured, focused, like a soldier on recon. Then, with one final glance toward the door, he backed up slowly, crouched low, and slipped through the loose lower latch. By the time the station lights flicked back on, after a brief power blink, Ranger was already gone. His paws silent on the wet earth, his nose pointed toward the forested ridgeline beyond the road, not wandering, not lost, tracking. And this time, he wasn't just following a scent, he was chasing ghosts. The hum of the private lab's generator echoed faintly in the back of Mia's head as she stood by the observation window, arms crossed, watching the coroner work. She hadn't told her captain about bringing Daniel's body here. The official line was transfer to federal custody. But Mia had learned not to wait for help that never came. Sometimes justice needed detours. The coroner, Dr. Layla Tran, was an old army medic she trusted, one of the few people who wouldn't ask too many questions. Layla worked carefully, peeling back the tattered remnants of Daniel's shirt with surgical scissors, bruising along. The ribs, defensive wounds on the forearms, multiple lacerations to the chest, deep, deliberate, following a pattern. Mia leaned forward, trying to piece the marks together until Layla paused, her gloved fingers brushing something unexpected. "There's stitching here," Layla murmured. "Subcutaneous, crude, but tight." Mia blinked. "Stitching? Yeah. Someone sewed something into his skin." She made a careful incision and peeled the flesh back just enough to expose it. There, embedded across Daniel's chest cavity, sewn between muscle and dermis like a warning note, was a patch of discolored tissue. The letters were raised, carved in skin, then crudely stitched shut, as if the killer wanted it hidden long enough to matter. 3 words. "The wolf knows." Mia's pulse hammered behind her ears. "What the hell?" Layla whispered. The phrase meant nothing in any code book, but to Mia it was personal. The wolf had been Daniel's nickname in their unit, a nod to how he'd silently stalk ahead during recon missions, vanish into sand and ruin, then reappear when you least expected. It had been a joke at first, then it became legend. Only their unit knew it. Mia took a step back, her breath catching. Someone had done this not just to kill Daniel, but to send a message to the rest of them. "Can I take the shirt?" she asked. Layla gave her a wary look. "You planning to do something stupid?" "I'm planning to find out who did this before they finish the list." That same night, as lights flickered back on inside the station after another storm surge rolled through the hills, Officer Cam Braden went to check the kennels and stopped cold. Ranger's cage door hung open, the lock still intact but unlatched. The camera feed had glitched during the power drop. No signs of force, no noise, no barking, just an empty cage and a faint trail of paw prints leading to the rear door, left slightly ajar. Cam cursed under his breath and ran outside, flashlight sweeping through the gravel lot and into the woods. The trail vanished quickly, soaked away by rain. But deep in the brush beyond, the silence felt heavier than usual. As Cam stood there trying to make sense of it, Ranger was already a mile into the tree line, cutting across terrain with a precision no average dog could manage. His breathing was measured, his nose catching faint remnants of something familiar, oil, sweat, and blood. Not fresh, but not gone either. He was drawn northward, through creek beds and stone breaks, as the wind shifted behind him. He reached a narrow trail around midnight, lit only by starlight cutting through pine limbs. And then he stopped. A boot print, heavy, deep, human. Ranger sniffed once, ears forward, muscles tight. Then he moved forward again, heading for a place no one had spoken of in years. Not since they buried what was left of Unit 17's legacy. Not since they all tried to forget. He was my friend. He was my family. The crime scene techs held back, uncertain what to do with the growling dog and the sobbing deputy. Mia gently reached out, brushing a strand of soaked hair from Daniel's face. The chill of his skin made her gasp, but she didn't pull away. She saw the carved wounds, the pattern, and behind the body, etched into the bark with precision, was a symbol. It stopped her breath cold. 2 crossed wolf fangs, the same symbol their unit had used during night raids in Ghazni, something they all swore never to replicate. Again, something only they would recognize. Ranger whined, pressing his head against Daniel's chest. Back at the county station, the sheriff's report would call it a possible suicide pending investigation. But Mia knew better. So did Ranger. Daniel Hurst had been missing in action for 3 weeks, and the army had labeled him a deserter, a coward. No honors, no search. And now here he was, chained like a traitor, left in a place too quiet, with wounds. Too deliberate to be anything other than a message. Ranger had seen something, or maybe he'd remembered something, and whatever pulled him into those woods, it wasn't over. Later that night, alone in the station kennel, Ranger refused food, refused water. He lay still, facing the bars. Then, without a sound, he stood and began to dig, not through the floor, through memory, the kind that claws its way up when silence settles too deep, when dogs remember what men try to forget. The fluorescent lights in the county morgue buzzed low and cold. Deputy Mia Halbridge stood in silence, her arms crossed as the coroner unzipped the body bag. Daniel's face looked different in the sterile light, less like the man who once cracked jokes during chow lines in Kandahar, more like a shadow of what the army left behind. His skin was pale, lips cracked from exposure, but his eyes, though closed, still seemed restless. Mia blinked back the stinging behind her eyes. "He wasn't supposed to die like this," she muttered. The coroner glanced up. "You knew him?" "Afghanistan. Same unit," she replied. "They said he went AWOL, left a forward post during a comms blackout." "That's the last I heard. He didn't respond. He didn't have to." The silence filled in the rest. The army had washed their hands of Daniel, branded him a liability, a deserter. No press release, no search effort. Just a quiet line in a file, status changed to dust one. Presumed AWOL, no recovery priority. Mia's fingers curled into fists. She looked back at Ranger, sitting obediently just outside the steel doors, his posture tense. The K9 had refused to leave the body until Mia had given the command herself. Even now, his eyes stayed locked on the door, as if waiting for Daniel to walk through it again. After the examination, Mia requested access to the belongings retrieved at the scene. There wasn't much: boots, shredded fatigues, the chain, and a set of blood-stained dog tags. She turned them over in her palm, the edges rough with rust and dried rain. Her thumb grazed over the name, SGT, Daniel Hurst. Back at her cruiser, she unfolded a photo from her glove box. Old, creased. Their unit, 6 men and 1 woman, all younger, dirtier, full of sand and spite. Daniel had been at the center, smiling with one arm slung around her neck and the other holding up a jerry can like a trophy. Behind them, spray-painted on the wall, of a ruined building, was the same symbol carved into the bark. 2 wolf fangs, crossed and dripping red, her stomach twisted. That symbol had been their unit's private mark. Not official, not recorded, something they made up after Ghazni, when the lines between orders and survival started to blur. They painted it on doorways after raids, carved it into ammo crates. A silent language. A warning to enemies. The wolves were here. Mia took a breath, pulled her phone, and scrolled through her old contacts. Most of them were long gone, some by death, others by distance or by shame. She found one name, Cal Mercer. Last she'd heard, he was working some backwater intel contract out west, dishonorably discharged for something no one could quite explain. But if anyone could make sense of this, it was Cal. She called. It rang 7 times before a gravel-thick voice answered. "This number's dead. So is anyone calling it?" "Lose it." "Cal, it's Mia." A pause. Then, quieter. "Mia Halbridge." "Jesus, I thought you vanished. I need to talk to you. It's about Daniel." The house sat at the edge of a quiet Montana town. A single-story cabin surrounded by wide, open sky and the long hush of pine woods beyond the property line. It wasn't much, just a sloped roof, a porch with 2 rocking chairs, and a gravel drive that never quite settled. But it was still peaceful, and that was the point. Ranger had adjusted to civilian life in his own way. He didn't sleep through the night, never would. But he no longer woke in a defensive stance. He barked only at raccoons and the occasional delivery driver, and he had taken a strange liking to lying under the porch during rainstorms. Maybe because they reminded him of that first night. Maybe because he still felt closer to Daniel in the quiet. Mia had made the adoption official weeks earlier. No ceremony, no paperwork photo, just a signature and a soft pat to his side as she said, "Home now." He stayed by her heel everywhere she went, his pace matched to hers, eyes always scanning. When she taught self-defense workshops at the nearby VFW, he lay near the door. When she spoke at trauma support panels, he sat just behind her, silent and still. But every morning, without fail, he would walk the trail alone. Mia never stopped him. She'd watch from the porch as he padded toward the woods, disappearing into the trees. It was always the same trail, the one that led back to the old pine tree, now marked by a wooden post with a brass plate. Daniel's name was carved there, along with the inscription left behind from his casket, "The Wolf Knows." Ranger would lay beneath the tree, not out of grief, not any more, but remembrance. His ears would twitch at birds, his nose tracking the breeze, but he didn't move, until the sun was fully up. Then, after a few minutes, never more than 20, he'd turn and return the way he came, step by step, calm, composed. It wasn't mourning. It was a ritual, a promise kept. One morning, Mia followed him quietly, hanging back far enough not to intrude. She stood just inside the clearing and watched as Ranger reached the tree and lowered himself to the ground, chest against the roots. He didn't make a sound, just waited. And for the first time, she saw what this was. It wasn't about Daniel anymore. It was about all of them, about the ones who hadn't made it out, about the ones who had, but never came back in the ways that mattered, about loyalty that had nothing to do with uniforms or rank or medals, and everything to do with presence. When Ranger stood and turned back, he saw her watching. He didn't flinch or change his pace. He just walked to her side and waited. They went home together, wordless. That night, Mia sat on the porch, a cup of coffee cooling in her hand. Cal had called earlier. More hearings were being scheduled, former officials flipping, more names exposed, progress. But she couldn't stop thinking about the clearing and the way Ranger had laid so still, not as a soldier, not even as a dog, but as a witness. Ranger came to rest beside her, his head nudging her boot gently. "You did it," she said quietly. "You brought it all home." He closed his eyes. A breeze moved through the trees. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called once, then silence. Mia looked to the stars, then down to the scarred patch of fur on Ranger's side, the spot where the first branding mark had nearly touched him before Daniel stopped it. Not a scar of pain anymore, but of memory. The story was over, but the truth, the kind carved not in skin but in loyalty, would stay. And the dog who remembered, he finally didn't have to anymore.